Disclaimer, this story includes a decent amount of French and Spanish, so I'm just going to go ahead and apologize for any mispronunciations and mistakes when I get to that part. How to write a Blackwood article. In the name of the prophet, figs, cry of Turkish fig peddler. I presume everybody has heard of me. My name is Signora Psyche Zenobia. This I know to be a fact. Nobody but my enemies ever calls me Suki Snobs. I have been assured that Suki is but a vulgar corruption of Psyche, which is good Greek, and means the soul. That's me. I'm all soul, and sometimes a butterfly, which latter meaning undoubtedly alludes to my appearance in my new crimson satin dress with a sky-blue Arabian mantelet, and the trimmings of green agrafas, and the 7 flounces of orange-colored aruculas. As for snobs, any person who should look at me would be instantly aware that my name wasn't Snobs. Ms. Tabitha Turnip propagated that report through sheer envy. Tabitha Turnip, indeed. Oh, the little wretch. But what can we expect from a turnip? Wonder if she remembers the old adage about blood out of a turnip, etc.? Mim, put her in mind of it the first opportunity. Mim, again, pull her nose. Where was I? I have been assured that Snobs is a mere corruption of Zenobia, and that Zenobia was a queen. So am I. Dr. Moneypenny always calls me the Queen of Hearts. And that Zenobia, as well as Psyche, is good Greek, and that my father was a Greek, and that consequently I have a right to our patronymic, which is Zenobia, and not by any means Snobs. And nobody but Tabitha Turnip calls me Suki Snobs. I am the Signora Psyche Zenobia. As I said before, everybody has heard of me. I am that very Signora Psyche Zenobia, so justly celebrated as corresponding secretary of the Philadelphia Regular Exchange Tea Total Young Bells Lettres Universal Experimental Bibliographical Association to Civilize Humanity. Dr. Moneypenny made the title for us and says he chose it because it sounded big, like an empty rum puncheon. A vulgar man, sometimes, but he's deep. We all sign the initials of the society after our names, in the fashion of the RSA, Royal Society of Arts, the SDUK, Society for the Diffusion of Useful Knowledge, etc., etc. Dr. Moneypenny says the S stands for stale, and that DUK spells duck, but it don't, and that SDUK stands for stale duck, and not for Lord Brougham's Society. But then Mr. Moneypenny is such a queer man that I am never sure when he is telling me the truth. At any rate, he always add to our names the initials PRETTYBLUEBATCH. That is to say, Philadelphia Regular Exchange Tea Total Young Bells Lectures Universal Experimental Bibliographical Association to Civilize Humanity. 1 letter for each word, which is a decided improvement upon Lord Brougham. Dr. Moneypenny will have it that our initials give our true character. But for my life, I can't see what he means. Notwithstanding the good offices of the doctor, and the strenuous exertions of the association to get itself into notice, it met with no very great success until I joined it. The truth is, the members indulged in too flippant a tone of discussion. The papers read every Saturday evening were characterized less by depth than buffoonery. They were all whipped syllabub. There was no investigation of first causes, first principles. There was no investigation of anything at all. There was no attention paid to the great point the fitness of things. In short, there was no fine writing like this. It was all low, very. No profundity, no reading, no metaphysics, nothing which the learned called spirituality, and which the unlearned choose to stigmatize as cant. Dr. M says I ought to spell Kent with a capital K, but I know better. When I joined the society, it was my endeavor to introduce a better style of thinking and writing, and all the world knows how well I have succeeded. We get up as good papers now in the PRETTYBLUEBATCH as any to be found even in Blackwood. I say Blackwood because I have been assured that the first writing, upon every subject, is to be discovered in the pages of that justly celebrated magazine. We now take it for our model upon all themes, and are getting into rapid notice accordingly. And, after all, it's not so very difficult a matter to compose an article of the genuine Blackwood stamp, if one only goes properly about it. Of course, I don't speak of the political articles. Everybody knows how they are managed, since Dr. Moneypenny explained it. Mr. Blackwood has a pair of tailors, shears, and 3 apprentices who stand by him for orders. One hands him the Times, another the Examiner, and a third a Gully's new compendium of slang wang. Mr. B merely cuts out and intersperses. It is soon done. Nothing but Examiner, slang wang, and Times. Then Times, slang wang, and Examiner. And then Times, Examiner, and slang wang. But the chief merit of the magazine lies in its miscellaneous articles, and the best of these come under the head of what Dr. Moneypenny calls the bizarres, whatever that may mean, and what everybody else calls the intensities. This is a species of writing which I have long known how to appreciate, although it is only since my late visit to Mr. Blackwood, deputed by the Society, that I have been made aware of the exact method of composition. This method is very simple, but not so much so as the politics. Upon my calling at Mr. B.'s and making known to him the wishes of the Society, he received me with great civility, took me into his study, and gave me a clear explanation of the whole process. "My dear madam," said he, evidently struck with my majestic appearance, for I had on a crimson satin with a green afagrass and orange-colored auriculas. "My dear madam," said he, "sit down. The matter stands thus. In the first place, your writer of intensities must have very black ink and a very big pen, with a very blunt nib. And mark me, Miss Psyche Zenobia," he continued, after a pause with the most expressive energy and solemnity of manner, "mark me, that pen must never be mended. Herein, madam, lies the secret, the soul of intensity. I assure upon myself to say that no individual, however great genius, ever wrote with a good pen, understand me, a good article. You may take it for granted that when manuscript can be read, it is never worth reading. This is a leading principle in our faith, to which, if you cannot readily assent, our conference is at an end." He paused. But of course, as I had no wish to put an end to the conference, I assented to the proposition so very obvious, and one, too, of whose truth I had all along been sufficiently aware. He seemed pleased, and went on with his instructions. "It may appear invidious in me, Miss Psyche Zenobia, to refer you to an article, or set of articles, in the way of model or study. Yet perhaps I may as well call your attention to a few cases. Let me see. There was The Dead Alive, a capital thing, a record of a gentleman's sensations when entombed before the breath was out of his body, full of taste, terror, sentiment, metaphysics, and erudition. You would have sworn that the writer had been born and brought up in a coffin. Then we have The Confessions of an Opium Eater. Fine, very fine, glorious imagination, deep philosophy, acute speculation, plenty of fire and fury. and they were spicing of the decidedly unintelligible. That was a nice bit of flummery, and went down the throats of the people delightfully. They would have had it that Coleridge wrote the paper, but not so. It was composed by my pet baboon, Juniper, over a rummer of Hollands and water, hot without sugar. This I could scarcely have believed had it been anybody but Mr. Blackwood, who assured me of it. Then there was the involuntary experimentalist, all about a gentleman who got baked in an oven and came out alive and well, although certainly done to a turn. And then there was the diary of a late physician, where the merit lay in good rant and indifferent Greek, both of them taking things for the public. And then there was The Man and the Bell, a paper, by the by, Miss Zenobia, which I cannot sufficiently recommend to your attention. It is the history of a young person who goes to sleep under the clapper of a church bell, and is awakened by its tolling for a funeral. The sound drives him mad, and accordingly, pulling out his tablets, he gives a record of his sensations. Sensations are the great things, after all. Should you ever be drowned or hung, be sure and make a note of your sensations. They will be worth to you 10 guineas a sheet. If you wish to write forcibly, Mrs. Zenobia, pay minute attention to the sensations. That I certainly will, Mr. Blackwood, said I. Good, he replied. I see you are a pupil after my own heart. But I must put your au-fait and the details necessary in composing what may be denominated a genuine Blackwood article of the sensation stamp, the kind which you will understand me to say I consider the best for all purposes. The first thing requisite is to get yourself into such a scrape as no one ever got into before. The oven, for instance, that was a good hit. But if you have no oven or big bell at hand, and if you cannot conveniently tumble out of a balloon, or be swallowed up in an earthquake, or get struck fast in a chimney, you will have to be contented with simply imagining some similar misadventure. I should prefer, however, that you have the actual effect to bear you out. Nothing so well assists the fancy as an experiential knowledge of the matter in hand. Truth is strange, you know, stranger than fiction. Besides, being more to the purpose. Here I assured him I had an excellent pair of garters, and would go and hang myself forthwith. Good, he replied. Do so. Although hanging is somewhat hackneyed, perhaps you might do better. Take a dose of Brandreth's pills, and then give us your sensations. However, my instructions will apply equally well to any variety of misadventure, and on your way home you may easily get knocked on the head, or run over by an omnibus, or bitten by a mad dog, or drowned in a gutter. But to proceed. Having determined upon your subject, you must next consider the tone, or manner, of your narration. There is the tone didactic, the tone enthusiastic, the tone natural, all commonplace enough. But then there is the tone laconic, or curt, which lately come much into use. It consists in short sentences, somehow thus: can't be too brief, can't be too snappish, always a full stop, and never a paragraph. Then there is the tone elevated, diffusive, and interjectional. Some of our best novelists patronize this tone. The words must be all in a whirl, like a humming top, and make a noise very similar, which answers remarkably well instead of meaning. This is the best of all possible styles where the writer is in too great a hurry to think. The term metaphysical is also a good one. If you know any big words, that is your chance for them. Talk of the Ionic and the Eleatic schools, of Aractas, Gorgias, and Archaemon. Say something about objectivity and subjectivity. Be sure and abuse a man named Locke. Turn up your nose at things in general, and when you let slip anything a little too absurd, you need not be at the trouble of scratching it out, but just add a footnote and say that you are indebted for the above profound observation to the Kritik der Riemen Vernunft, or to the Metaphysik Anfasskunde der Narrwissenschaft. This will look erudite and frank. There are various other tones of equal celebrity, but I shall mention only two more: the tone transcendental and the tone heterogeneous. In the former, the merit consists in seeing into the nature of affairs a very great deal farther than anybody else. The second sight is very efficient when properly managed. A little reading of the dial will carry you a great way. Eschew in this case big words. Get them as small as possible and write them upside down. Look over Channing's poems and quote what he says about a fat little man with a delusive show of can. Put in something about the supernal oneness. Don't say a syllable about the infernal two-ness. Above all, study innuendo. Hint everything, assert nothing. If you feel inclined to say bread and butter, do not by any means say it outright. You may say anything and everything approaching to bread and butter. You may hint at buckwheat cake, or you may even go so far as to insinuate oatmeal porridge. But if bread and butter be your real meaning, be cautious, my dear Miss Psyche, not on any account to say bread and butter. I assured him that I should never say it again as long as I lived. He kissed me and continued, As for the tone heterogeneous, it is merely a judicious mixture in equal proportions of all the other tones in the world, and consequently made up of everything deep, great, odd, piquant, pertinent, and pretty. Let us suppose now you have determined upon your incidence and tone. The most important portion, in fact the soul of the whole business, is yet to be attended to, and I allude to the filling up. It is not to be supposed that a lady, or gentleman either, has been leading the life of a bookworm, and yet above all things it is necessary that your article have an air of erudition, or at least afford evidence of extensive general reading. Now I'll put you in the way of accomplishing this point. See here, pulling down some 3 or 4 ordinary-looking volumes and opening them at random. By casting your eye down almost any page of any book in the world, you will be able to perceive at once a host of little scraps of either learning or bel espiritism, which are the very thing for the spicing of a Blackwood article. You must as well note down a few while I read them to you. I shall make 2 divisions. First, piquant facts for the manufacture of similes, and second, piquant expressions to be introduced as occasion may acquire. Write now. And I wrote as he dictated. Piquant facts for similes. There were originally but 3 muses: Melete, Memne, Eode, meditation, memory, and singing. You may make a good deal of that little fact if properly worked. You see, it is not generally known and looks recherché. You must be careful and give the thing with an downright improviso air. Again, the river Adelphus passed beneath the sea, and emerged without injury to the purity of its waters. Rather stale, that, to be sure, but if properly dressed and dished up, will look quite as fresh as ever. Here is something better. The Persian iris appears to some persons to possess a sweet and a very powerful perfume, while to others it is perfectly scentless. Fine that, and very, very delicate. Turn it about a little, and it will do wonders. We'll have something else in the botanical line. There's nothing goes down so well, especially with the help of a little Latin. Right. The Epidermium flos iris of Java bears a very beautiful flower, and will live when pulled up by the roots. The natives suspend it by a cord from the ceiling, and enjoy its fragrance for years. That's capital. That will do for the similes. Now, for the piquant expressions. The quaint expressions. The venerable Chinese novel, Zhu Kao Li. Good. By introducing these few words with dexterity, you will evince an intimate acquaintance with the language and literature of the Chinese. With the aid of this, you may possibly get along without either Arabic or Sanskrit or Chickasaw. There is no passing muster, however, without Spanish, Italian, German, Latin, and Greek. I must look you out a little specimen of each. Any scrap will answer, because you must depend upon your own ingenuity to make it fit into your article. Now, write. Aussi tendre que zaire, as tender as zaire, French, alludes to the frequent repetition of the phrase la tendre zaire and the French tragedy of that name. Properly introduced will show not only your knowledge of the language, but your general reading and wit. You can say, for instance, that the chicken you were eating, write an article about being choked to death by a chicken bone, was not altogether aussi tendre que zaire. Right. Van muerte tan escondida que no te centra venir, porque el placer de morir no me torne a dar la vida. That's Spanish, from Miguel de Cervantes. Come quickly, O death, but be sure, and don't let me see you coming, lest the pleasure I shall feel at your appearance should unfortunately bring me back again to life. This you may slip in quite apropos when you are struggling in the last agonies with a chicken bone. Right. Il povero uomo che non se era accorto andava combattendo e era morto. That's Italian, you perceive, from ero sotto. It means that a great hero, in the heat of combat, not perceiving that he had been fairly killed, continued to fight valiantly, dead as he was. The application of this to your own case is obvious, for I trust, Miss Psyche, that you will not neglect to kick for it at least an hour and a half after you have been choked to death by that chicken bone. Please to write. Und sterb ik doch, se sterb ik din, Dutch se. That's German, from Snilner. And if I die, at least I die, for thee. Here it is clear that you are apophthegizing the cause of your disaster, the chicken. Indeed, what gentleman, or lady either, of sense wouldn't die, I should like to know, for a well-fattened capon of the right Molucca breed, stuffed with capers and mushrooms, and served up in a salad bowl, with orange jellies en masques. Right. You can get them that way at Torney's. Right, if you please. Here is a nice little Latin phrase, and rare too. One can't be too recherché or brief in one's Latin. It's getting so common. Ignoratio elenche, or elenche. He has committed an ignoratio elenche. That is to say, he has understood the words of your proposition, but not the idea. The man was a fool, you see. Some poor fellow whom you addressed while choking with a chicken bone, and who therefore didn't precisely understand what you were talking about. Throw the ignoratio elenche in his teeth, and at once you have him annihilated. If he dares to reply, you can tell him from Lucan, here it is, that speeches are mere anome verborum, anome words. The anome, with great brilliancy, has no smell. Or if he begins to bluster, you may be down upon him with insomnia jovis, or jovis, reveries of Jupiter, a phrase which Silius Italicus, see here, applies to thoughts pompous and inflated. This will be sure and cut him to the heart. He can do nothing but roll over and die. Will you be kind enough to write? In Greek, we must have something pretty, from Demosthenes, for example. Anero phagon kai palin majestai. There's a tolerably good translation for it in Hudibras. For he that flies may fight again, which he can never do that's slain. In a Blackwood article, nothing makes so fine a show as your Greek. The very letters have an air of profundity about them. Only observe, madam, the astute look of the epsilon. That phi ought certainly to be a bishop. Was ever there a smarter fellow than the omicron? Just twig that tau. In short, there is nothing like Greek for a genuine sensation paper. In the present case, your application is the most obvious thing in the world. Rap out the sentence, write with a huge oath, and by the way of ultimatum at the good-for-nothing, dunder-headed villain who couldn't understand your plain English in relation to the chicken bone. He'll take the hint and be off. You may depend upon it. These were all the instructions Mr. B could afford me upon the topic in question, but I felt they would be entirely sufficient. I was at length able to write a genuine Blackwood article, and determined to do it forthwith. In taking leave of me, Mr. B made a proposition for the purchase of the paper when written, but as he could offer me only 50 guineas a sheet, I thought it better to let our society have it, than sacrifice it for so paltry a sum. Notwithstanding this niggardly spirit, however, the gentleman showed his consideration for me in all other respects, and indeed treated me with the greatest civility. His parting words made a deep impression upon my heart, and I hope I shall always remember them with gratitude. "My dear Miss Zenobia," he said, with the tears stood in his eyes, "is there anything else I can do to promote the success of your laudable undertaking? Let me reflect. It is just possible that you may not be able, so soon as convenient, to get yourself drowned, or choked with chicken bone, or hung, or bitten by a butt stay. Now I think me of it, there are a couple of very excellent bulldogs in the yard. Fine fellows, I assure you, savage and all that. Indeed, just the thing for your money. They'll have you eaten up, auriculus and all, in less than 5 minutes. Here, my watch. And then only think of the sensations. Here, I say, Tom, Peter, Dick, you villain, let out those." But as I was really in a great hurry, and had not another moment to spare, I was reluctantly forced to expedite my departure, and accordingly took leave at once, somewhat more abruptly, I admit, than strict courtesy would have otherwise allowed. It was my primary object upon quitting Mr. Blackwood to get into some immediate difficulty, pursuant to his advice, and with this view, I spent a greater part of the day in wandering about Edinburgh, seeking for desperate adventures adequate to the intensity of my feelings, and adapted to the vast character of the article I intended to write. In this excursion I was attended by one servant, Pompey, and my little lap-dog, Diana, whom I had brought with me from Philadelphia. It was not, however, until late in the afternoon that I fully succeeded in my arduous undertaking. An important event then happened, of which the following Blackwood article, in the tone heterogeneous, is the substance and result.